You don't need to do anything with this. You don't need to understand why you're here. You don't need to hold on to any meaning. This didn't arrive by accident. And it also didn't arrive with a task. If you're driving or moving or doing something that needs your attention, let this remain far away, like a sound from another room, like something you don't have to turn toward. And if you're resting or lying down or simply letting the night be the night, then nothing else is required. You don't have to listen closely. You don't have to stay with the words. You don't have to remember any of this later. This is not a message. It's not a signal. It's not something meant to change you. It's just a quiet presence that happened to meet you here. You didn't need to look for it. You didn't need to decide. You didn't need to arrive prepared. Some things meet us without effort. They don't knock loudly. They don't announce themselves. They simply appear and remain without asking to be understood. This is one of those moments. There's a part of the mind that likes reasons. It wants to know how something happened, why it appeared now, what it's supposed to mean. But tonight, that part doesn't need to work. It can rest. It can step back. It doesn't need to figure this out. You're not missing anything by not knowing. You're not falling behind by not understanding. Nothing here requires explanation. You don't have to trace a path back to how you got here. You don't have to justify staying. You don't have to justify leaving either. This moment doesn't need your permission to exist. And you don't need its permission to rest. If your mind keeps asking questions, let it. Questions don't have to be answered. They don't even have to be quiet. They can speak into the dark and receive nothing back. That's allowed. Not everything that appears is meant to be carried forward. Not everything that arrives is meant to be kept. Some things come only to be felt briefly and then released without ceremony. You don't have to remember this night. You don't have to remember these words. You don't have to store anything for later. There is nothing here you'll need tomorrow. Nothing you'll be tested on. Nothing you'll be expected to recall. This space doesn't ask you to hold on. It asks nothing at all. You may notice the familiar urge to stay alert, to pay attention, to make sure you don't miss something important. That urge can soften. Nothing important is hiding here. Nothing crucial will slip past you if you drift. Nothing will be lost if you stop listening. The night will continue either way. Your body will continue either way. You don't have to supervise the moment. You don't have to be present in a specific way. You don't have to anchor yourself. You're allowed to be vague. You're allowed to be unfocused. You're allowed to be halfway elsewhere. This is not a moment that requires precision. It doesn't require clarity. It doesn't require effort. Somewhere inside, you might notice a subtle relief. Not dramatic, not sudden, just the easing of something that was holding on. The easing of the idea that you need to remember, that you need to mark this, that you need to make sense of it. You don't. This can pass through you quietly, like a reflection on water, visible for a moment, gone without leaving a trace. And nothing needs to be saved. Nothing needs to be taken with you. You can let this be exactly what it is, and nothing more. This was not an accident, but it also doesn't need to become a story. It doesn't need a reason. It doesn't need a conclusion. It can simply be a quiet crossing, a moment you didn't look for, a moment that doesn't ask to be remembered, and you can rest inside that. There is a quiet habit the mind has at night. It begins sorting, saving, placing small markers, as if it's saying, "Remember this. Don't forget that. You'll need this later." That habit doesn't mean anything is actually important. It's just something the mind learned to do. A way of staying prepared, a way of staying involved. But tonight, nothing needs to be kept. Nothing needs to be stored. Nothing needs to be placed aside for tomorrow. You don't have to remember how you felt today. You don't have to remember what you thought. You don't have to remember what you meant to do. The night is not a place for carrying. It's a place for setting things down without deciding where they belong. You might notice a thought that feels important, a phrase that repeats, a small idea that says, "Hold on to this." You don't have to push it away. You don't have to argue with it. You can simply not pick it up. Importance fades when it isn't held. Urgency softens when it isn't reinforced. A thought can appear and disappear without becoming memory. Not everything that passes through the mind is meant to stay. Some things pass because passing is their only purpose. And you don't have to judge which is which. You don't have to decide what matters. Tonight, that responsibility can rest. The mind doesn't need to archive this moment. It doesn't need to file it away. It doesn't need to keep a record. There will be no quiz in the morning. No need to recall what happened here. Nothing will be missing if you forget this entirely. You don't need to remember this voice. You don't need to remember these words. They don't need to follow you. They don't need to become part of anything. They can dissolve as soon as they pass. Memory can rest. It doesn't need to stay alert. It doesn't need to keep watch. It doesn't need to collect. The drawer can stay open. Nothing has to be placed inside. You may notice a subtle tension when something feels like it should be remembered. A slight tightening, a reflexive grip. That grip can loosen, not because you're forcing it to, but because there is nothing actually being asked of you. Nothing depends on remembering. Nothing falls apart if you forget. Nothing becomes incomplete. Your life does not require you to carry tonight forward. Tomorrow does not need tonight's details. Tomorrow will meet you fresh without needing a report. You don't have to pack anything for it. You don't have to prepare. You don't have to bring proof of where you've been. You can arrive empty-handed. There is relief in that, a quiet relief. The relief of not being responsible for holding the thread. The relief of not being the keeper of moments. You don't have to be the one who remembers. Memory can take the night off. It can drift. It can blur. It can stop distinguishing one thing from another. Nothing here needs to be named. Nothing needs to be labeled. Nothing needs to be preserved. If something truly belongs with you, it will return on its own. It won't need effort. It won't need protection. It won't need to be held tightly. Things that matter know how to stay. Things that don't can fade without consequence. You don't need to decide which is which right now. That discernment can sleep. You can let thoughts come and go without leaving marks, like footprints in water, appearing for a moment, then gone. No trace, no obligation, nothing to keep. nothing to remember. You are allowed to forget this night completely. You are allowed to wake up without knowing what happened here. Nothing will be missing because of that. Nothing will be lost. This space doesn't need to be carried with you. It can remain here, unclaimed, unstored, unremembered, and you can rest in that absence of responsibility. You can let the need to remember fade into the background. You can let memory step aside. Nothing needs to be kept. There is a quiet tendency the mind has before sleep. It starts packing, not physically, internally, gathering small pieces of the day, moments, thoughts, unfinished impressions, as if tomorrow requires proof of today, as if you need to arrive carrying something. But tonight, tomorrow doesn't need anything from you. It doesn't need preparation. It doesn't need explanation. It doesn't need a summary. You don't have to bring the day with you. You don't have to carry how you felt. You don't have to carry what you didn't finish. You don't have to carry what you wished you had said. Tomorrow will not ask for those things. It won't quiz you. It won't check your pockets. It won't need a report. You can arrive empty. There is nothing to pack. No mental bag to fill. No checklist to complete. No loose ends that require attention right now. The idea that you should prepare for tomorrow can soften. Not because tomorrow isn't important, but because preparation doesn't belong to the night. Night is not a staging area. It's not a waiting room. It's not a place to rehearse what comes next. Night is where things are allowed to remain unfinished, unresolved, uncarried. You might notice thoughts that say, "I'll deal with this later. I should remember this. I can't forget that." Those thoughts don't need an answer. They don't need reassurance. They can exist without being obeyed. You don't have to promise them anything. You don't have to guarantee you'll return. You can let them speak into the dark and receive nothing back. Tomorrow doesn't need you to stay awake for it. It doesn't need you to keep watch. It doesn't need you to hold the future in your mind. The future is not fragile. It doesn't break if you stop thinking about it. It doesn't disappear if you let it go for the night. It knows how to arrive on its own. You don't have to escort it. You don't have to make room. You don't have to clear a path. You can let the idea of later fade. You can let the idea of next dissolve. There is no next right now. There is only this unclaimed space, and even that doesn't need to be noticed. You don't need to imagine tomorrow. You don't need to picture it. You don't need to feel ready for it. Readiness is not required. You are allowed to rest without being prepared. You are allowed to sleep without being responsible for what comes after. Nothing will be missing because you didn't plan. Nothing will be harder because you didn't rehearse. You don't have to keep the future warm while you sleep. It can take care of itself. You can let go of the habit of carrying expectations, carrying concerns, carrying unfinished thoughts. You can set all of that down without deciding where it belongs, without labeling it, without promising to return. There is a quiet relief in realizing that tomorrow will meet you either way, with or without preparation, with or without memory, with or without effort. And you don't have to make that happen. You can simply stop packing. You can let the mind's hands open. You can let everything fall where it is. Nothing needs to be gathered. Nothing needs to be brought along. Nothing needs to be secured. You can leave tomorrow unpacked and rest in that. There is a quiet habit that often appears after everything else slows down. When the mind has stopped sorting, when it has stopped packing, when it has stopped trying to remember, it turns to meaning. It asks, "What was that about? What did it mean? Why did this happen?" As if every moment needs a translation, as if experience isn't complete until it becomes a story. But tonight, meaning does not need to be made. Nothing here requires interpretation. Nothing here needs to be explained. You don't have to understand what today was for. You don't have to understand why certain things felt the way they did. You don't have to assign purpose. You don't have to connect dots. You don't have to turn experience into insight. Meaning can rest. The mind doesn't have to turn everything into something useful. It doesn't have to extract lessons. It doesn't have to decide what mattered and what didn't. Tonight, experience can remain exactly as it was, untranslated, unlabeled, free of conclusions. You might notice a familiar pull to figure things out, a thought that says, "This must mean something." That pull doesn't need resistance. It doesn't need correction. You can simply not follow it. Meaning fades when it isn't pursued. Questions soften when they aren't fed. Not every experience is a message. Not every feeling is a signal. Not every moment is pointing somewhere else. Some moments exist only to pass through, and they don't lose their value by remaining undefined. You don't have to turn your life into a narrative tonight. You don't have to decide what kind of person you were today. You don't have to summarize who you are becoming. Identity can rest too. You are not required to know what this night says about you. You are not required to know what today says about your future. Those questions can wait. They don't belong to the dark. The dark is not a place for clarity. It's a place for quiet. You may notice the mind reaching for meaning out of habit, trying to place events into context, trying to make sense of emotions. You can let that movement slow. You can let it stop halfway. Nothing bad happens when meaning remains unresolved. Nothing breaks. Nothing becomes incomplete. Life does not pause waiting for interpretation. It continues without needing to be understood, and you can rest inside that continuation. You can allow experience to remain raw, unfinished, unprocessed. That is not avoidance, that is rest. Processing can happen later, or not at all. Not everything needs to become something. Not everything needs to make sense. Not everything needs a reason. Tonight, meaning can step aside. It doesn't need to supervise the moment. It doesn't need to assign importance. It doesn't need to explain why you're here. You don't have to explain yourself to the night. You don't have to justify how you feel. You don't have to prove that anything mattered. You can let the need for meaning fade, like a question losing its urgency, like a thought dissolving before it finishes. And if there is a moment where nothing seems to mean anything, that is not emptiness. That is openness. That is the space where effort has fully let go, where nothing is being demanded from you, where nothing is being asked to become something else. Meaning can sleep, and you can rest without it. There is one more thing the mind often holds on to at night, after memory quiets, after plans loosen, after meaning steps aside. The sense of being someone remains. I am the one who experienced this. I am the one who feels this way. I am the one who has to carry this. That sense doesn't need to disappear. It doesn't need to be challenged. But tonight, It doesn't need to be held so tightly. You don't have to be anyone in particular right now. You don't have to be the person who had that day. You don't have to be the person with a history. You don't have to be the person with a future. You can rest without maintaining an identity, without holding yourself together, without keeping track of who you are supposed to be. The night does not ask you to show up as yourself. It does not ask for consistency. It does not ask for definition. You can loosen the sense of me, not by pushing it away, but by no longer reinforcing it. You don't have to say, "This happened to me." You don't have to say, "I feel this." Experience can occur without ownership. Sensations can rise and fall without a center. Thoughts can move without belonging to anyone. You don't have to stand behind them. You don't have to claim them. You don't have to be the one experiencing. You can let the idea of someone here soften. You can let it blur at the edges. You are allowed to be less defined, less outlined, less solid. Nothing is lost when identity relaxes. Nothing disappears. There is no danger in letting go of the role. You will return to it easily when the night is over. But for now, it doesn't need to be worn. You don't have to be you in the way you usually are. You don't have to recognize yourself. You don't have to maintain continuity. The body knows how to rest without a story. It knows how to exist without a name. It knows how to be without being someone. You may notice a sense of space opening, not inside you, but around everything, as if the edges of experience have softened, as if nothing needs to be held in place. That is not loss. That is relief. The relief of not having to be defined. The relief of not having to represent anything. The relief of not having to be a self for a while. You don't need to monitor this. You don't need to think about what it means. You don't need to worry about coming back. You will, easily, naturally, without effort. For now, you can let the sense of identity drift, like a coat set down on a chair, still there, just not being worn. You can rest without carrying yourself, without remembering who you are, without rehearsing who you will be. The night can hold you without labels, without names, without a center. You don't have to be someone tonight, and nothing needs you to be. There is nothing left to loosen now, nothing left to set down, nothing left to step away from. You don't need to remember anything from this night. You don't need to take anything with you. You don't need to stay. You don't need to go. There is no moment you need to mark as important. No ending that needs to be recognized. No final thought to hold on to. Time can blur. Not forward, not backward, just thinning, like light fading without direction. You don't have to know where you are in the night. You don't have to know how long it has been. Those questions don't matter anymore. Nothing depends on the answer. The body doesn't need a timeline to rest. The mind doesn't need an explanation to soften. Everything that needed to release has already released. Everything that needed to quiet has already quieted. There is no work left to do, no effort left to make. Even the idea of resting can rest now. You don't need to check whether you're awake. You don't need to check whether you're asleep. Those states can overlap. They don't need to be named. You can drift without knowing you're drifting. You can fade without noticing the fade. There is no line you need to cross, no threshold you need to pass, nothing you need to arrive at. This space doesn't ask for your attention. It doesn't ask for your awareness. It doesn't ask for you at all. and that is safe. That is enough. If thoughts appear, let them appear. If they disappear, let them disappear. You don't have to follow either movement. Everything can happen on its own. You don't need to be present for it. You don't need to witness it. You don't need to remember it later. This night does not require a memory. It does not require a story. It does not require a self. You can let yourself become less distinct, less outlined, less involved, like sound becoming distance, like distance becoming quiet. There is nothing to return to, nothing to resolve, nothing waiting on the other side. And if there is a moment where nothing is happening at all, that is not absence. That is rest. That is the place where effort has fully stopped, where nothing is being held together, where nothing is being asked. You don't need to stay here. You don't need to leave here. There is no here, only a soft continuation, a gentle thinning, a quiet that doesn't announce itself. Nothing to hold, nothing to remember, nothing to be, and nothing is missing.